The year is 1943. Above the smoke-choked skies of wartime Europe, the air itself shrieked with the fury of battle. This was no ordinary conflict. It was a brutal, relentless aerial ballet of death, where young men, barely out of their teens, climbed into steel birds and fought to the last breath. Imagine the raw, visceral terror. The deafening roar of engines, the staccato bark of machine guns spitting fire, tracers arcing through the clouds like deadly meteors. Every flight was a roll of the dice, a desperate gamble against fate, where victory meant survival, and defeat often meant a fiery plunge to the unforgiving earth below. Pilots, American and German alike, were locked in a merciless embrace, each committed to destroying the other, fueled by patriotism, fear, and the sheer will to live. In this crucible of conflict, humanity was often the first casualty. The enemy was dehumanized, a faceless force to be eliminated, not a fellow human being with dreams, fears, and a family waiting back home. Yet, amidst this chaos, this ingrained hatred, an extraordinary event unfolded that would challenge every preconceived notion of warfare. It was a single, profound act of compassion, performed by an American officer for a fallen German foe, an act so unexpected, so deeply human, that it would reverberate through history for decades. Picture the scene. A downed aircraft, twisted metal, and shattered dreams scattered across a foreign field. An American, a victor in the sky, lands and approaches the wreckage. He finds the pilot, a young man like himself, but wearing the enemy uniform, lifeless. What happens next defies every expectation, every protocol of war. Instead of walking away, instead of leaving the fallen where he lay, this American officer chose to honor him. He chose dignity over animosity, reverence over revenge. He performed a burial, a solemn ceremony for a man he was trained to kill, a man whose nation was his sworn enemy. What compels an individual to demonstrate such profound humanity, such moral courage in the face of intense conflict and the ingrained hatred of war? How does one find empathy when surrounded by death and destruction, when the very air is thick with the cries of battle? This wasn't merely an act of kindness. It was a radical assertion of shared humanity that cut through the very fabric of warfare. It was a moment that begged the question, beneath the uniforms, the flags, and the political divides, are we not all just human beings, deserving of respect in life and in death? This singular, remarkable event, born from the ashes of a dogfight, was not forgotten. It became the quiet seed of a decades-long quest, a journey stretching across continents and generations. It's a story of a silent legacy, of a promise made not with words, but with actions, that would ultimately bridge the chasm of war and bring together lives that should have remained forever separated by conflict. This isn't just a tale of a burial. It's a testament to the enduring power of compassion, a narrative that challenges us to look beyond the labels of enemy and ally, and to recognize the universal thread that connects us all. Prepare to witness a story of profound human connection, a quest for truth that culminates in a healing reunion transcending enemy lines, proving that even in the darkest hours, the light of humanity can shine brightest. That light, however faint, was about to pierce through the thickest fog of war, specifically in the unrelenting theater of aerial combat during World War II. For the young men who took to the skies, strapped into their flying machines, the war was a visceral, personal struggle. These weren't just machines, they were extensions of young men, each trained to kill, each fighting for their homeland, their families, their very lives. The enemy wasn't a person, it was a target, a threat to be eliminated, a uniform to be shot down. The indoctrination was absolute, the stakes unimaginable. To hesitate was to die. To feel was a luxury no pilot could afford in the deadly dance above the clouds. In the spring of 1943, the skies over a quiet corner of rural France erupted into a maelstrom of gunfire and screaming engines. An American squadron, flying their formidable P-51 Mustangs, engaged a formation of German Messerschmitt 109s. The air filled with the staccato bark of 50-caliber machine guns, the terrifying whistle of diving planes, and the desperate maneuvers of pilots locked in a fight for survival. Tracers, like fiery threads, wove deadly patterns against the blue canvas, seeking their mark. Every pilot pushed his machine to its absolute limit, G-forces pinning them to their seats, sweat stinging their eyes, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against their ribs. It was a brutal ballet, a test of skill, nerve, and sheer will. Amidst this chaotic symphony of destruction, one German pilot, a young man with a family and a future he would never see, found himself outmaneuvered. His sleek Messerschmitt, once a symbol of German aerial might, shuddered under a barrage of American fire. Smoke billowed from its engine, a fatal wound. The plane spiraled, a crippled bird plummeting towards the verdant French countryside, its pilot fighting desperately for control until the very last moment. The American officer who had delivered the fatal blow watched it go down, a mixture of adrenaline and grim satisfaction coursing through him. It was a kill, another enemy neutralized, another step towards victory. Following standard procedure, the American officer circled the crash site to confirm the wreckage. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a quiet solemnity as he looked down at the twisted metal and scorched earth. He decided to land his Mustang in a nearby field, compelled by an instinct he couldn't quite articulate. The silence after the roar of his own engine was deafening, broken only by the crackle of cooling metal from the downed German plane. The smell of aviation fuel and burnt oil hung heavy in the air, a pungent reminder of the recent violence. He cautiously approached the mangled remains. The plane was a wreck, its sleek lines distorted into grotesque angles, and there, amidst the debris, he found the pilot. He was slumped in the cockpit, still strapped in, his flying helmet askew. He was young, impossibly young, perhaps no older than the American officer himself, his face frozen in a look of stark terror and sudden peace. His uniform, unmistakably German, was torn and stained, but it was the face that truly arrested the American. Not the face of a monster, not a faceless enemy, but a human being, a son, a brother, perhaps a husband, whose life had been extinguished in an instant. In that profound moment, the roar of the battle, the years of propaganda, the ingrained animosity, all seemed to recede into the background. The uniform became secondary. All that remained was the shared vulnerability of mortality, the undeniable truth that beneath the differing flags and ideologies, they were both just men, airmen who had dared to challenge the sky. A profound internal struggle began. His military training screamed at him to move on, to report the kill, to continue the mission. But a deeper, more fundamental human instinct stirred within him. This wasn't just a downed enemy, it was a fallen comrade, a fellow aviator who deserved a measure of dignity, even in death. He knelt beside the wreckage, his gaze fixed on the lifeless pilot. The thought of leaving him there, exposed to the elements, unacknowledged, felt profoundly wrong. It went against every fiber of his being, against the very principles of respect and honor he believed his nation stood for. He realized that this wasn't about validating the enemy's cause. It was about upholding his own humanity. It was an act of profound moral courage, a quiet rebellion against the dehumanizing machinery of war. He knew he was taking a risk, potentially violating protocols, but the moral imperative was overwhelming. He would not leave this young man to rot. With a heavy heart and a resolute spirit, the American officer began the arduous task. He found a shovel, perhaps from a nearby farmhouse, and started to dig. The earth was stubborn, the work physically demanding, but he persevered. Each shovelful of dirt was an act of defiance, a silent testament to the belief that even in war, some lines should not be crossed. He carefully extricated the German pilot from the wreckage, laying him gently on the ground. He straightened the uniform as best he could, closed the vacant eyes, and offered a silent prayer. It was a simple ceremony, performed by one enemy for another, under the vast, indifferent sky. He fashioned a makeshift cross from two pieces of shattered aircraft, marking the grave with a solemnity that transcended the conflict raging across the continent. It was a final, dignified farewell, a moment of profound human connection amidst the brutal absurdity of war, an act that would quietly echo through decades, waiting for its truth to be fully known. The American officer stood for a moment, a silent sentinel against the backdrop of a war-torn landscape, the fresh mound of earth, and the crude cross a stark monument to his solitary act. The weight of his actions, both the kill and the burial, settled upon him with a profound gravity. He returned to his Mustang, the engine sputtering to life, and climbed back into the sky, leaving behind a secret grave and a personal transformation that would forever alter his perspective. Upon his return to base, his squadron mates noted his somber demeanor, a common enough sight in a war where every mission carried the specter of death. The unwritten code of combat meant few questions were asked about the aftermath of a kill, beyond the necessary confirmation for official records. He reported the downed enemy, the location, the confirmation of the pilot's death. But he omitted the burial. How could he explain it? How could he articulate the sudden, overwhelming surge of shared humanity that had compelled him to honor an enemy? In a war where propaganda demonized the foe, where comrades were lost daily, such an act might be seen as weakness, as disloyalty, or at best, as utterly bizarre. He chose silence, carrying the memory as both a silent burden and a quiet source of pride, deep within him. It was a private act, a moral compass recalibrated in the crucible of war, a secret he guarded fiercely. As the war raged on, Captain Miller continued to fly, to fight, to witness unspeakable horrors and perform incredible feats of bravery. But that day, that solitary burial in the French countryside, remained etched in his soul. It was a moment of clarity in the fog of war, a testament to the enduring human spirit even amidst the most brutal conflict. He saw the faces of his enemies differently after that, no longer just targets, but young men, much like himself, caught in the same terrible machinery of war. This perspective didn't diminish his resolve to fight for his country, but it tempered it with a profound sense of sorrow for the universal cost of conflict. After the war, Miller returned home to the United States, a decorated hero. He built a life, married, raised a family, and pursued a successful career as an aerospace engineer. Yet, the memory of that German pilot and his makeshift grave never truly faded. It was a silent companion, a reminder of the best and worst of humanity he had witnessed. He rarely spoke of it, even to his closest family. The story felt too personal, too profound, perhaps too controversial for a world still grappling with the raw wounds of war. It was a narrative he held close, a quiet testament to a moral choice made in an immoral time. He might occasionally glance at a news report about post-war reconciliation or memorial services, and a flicker of that distant French field would cross his eyes. The identity of the German pilot remained unknown to him, a nameless face in a grave he had dug with his own hands. The world moved on, rebuilt itself, but the silent legacy of that burial persisted, a seed of humanity planted in hostile soil, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Decades passed. The Cold War came and went, replaced by new geopolitical challenges. The world changed dramatically, but the stories of World War II, both celebrated and forgotten, continued to hold a powerful grip on the American imagination. Captain Miller, now a venerable patriarch, eventually passed away, taking many of his wartime memories with him, but not all of them. It was his granddaughter, Sarah, a budding historian with an insatiable curiosity for her family's past, who stumbled upon the first clue. While sifting through her grandfather's old effects after his passing, a dusty box of medals, faded photographs, and worn letters, she discovered a small leather-bound journal. It was unassuming, tucked away beneath his pilot's logbook, and its pages were filled with terse, almost cryptic entries. Most were technical notes about flights, weather conditions, and combat encounters. But one entry, dated April 1943, stood out. It described a dogfight, a downed German plane, and then a series of emotionally charged, almost poetic lines about a young man, enemy uniform, and a grave under an oak tree. There were no names, no specific locations beyond rural France, but the raw emotion in the words was undeniable. It wasn't a report, it was a confession of the soul. Sarah felt a jolt. This was unlike anything she had ever heard about her grandfather's war experience. He had been a man of few words about combat, always focusing on the camaraderie and the necessity of the fight, never on such a deeply personal, almost tender act towards an enemy. The entry sparked an immediate burning curiosity within her. What did this mean? Who was this German pilot? And why had her grandfather kept this profound act a secret for so long? Driven by this newfound mystery, Sarah began her own quiet investigation. She started by cross-referencing her grandfather's squadron records with known German losses in the specified region of France during April 1943. It was a painstaking, often frustrating process. Military archives, historical societies, old maps, and even online forums dedicated to war and to aviation history became her new obsession. She spent countless hours poring over microfilm, digital databases, and obscure books, searching for any mention of an American pilot performing an act of mercy for a fallen German. Many times, she felt like giving up, convinced that the trail was too cold, the information too scant. It was a needle in a haystack, a whisper lost in the roar of history. But the journal entry, her grandfather's deeply personal words, kept pulling her forward. She felt a responsibility, not just as a historian, but as a granddaughter, to uncover the full truth of this extraordinary act. She believed it was a story that deserved to be told, a testament to the profound humanity that could emerge even in the darkest of times. The search intensified, moving from general inquiries to highly specific requests, narrowing down potential crash sites and matching them with her grandfather's flight paths. She contacted French local historians, shared excerpts from the journal, always careful to omit her grandfather's name initially, wanting to verify the story's plausibility before revealing his identity. Then, a breakthrough. A small, independent French historical society dedicated to documenting local World War II events responded to Sarah's persistent inquiries. They had a fragmented record, a local anecdote passed down through generations, about an American pilot who, in the spring of 1943, had landed near a downed German plane and, against all odds, buried its pilot. The details were sparse, almost mythological, but the date and location roughly matched Sarah's grandfather's journal entry. Crucially, they also possessed an old, faded photograph, taken by a local farmer after the American had departed, showing a freshly dug mound of earth marked by a crude, cross-shaped piece of wood. It was undeniable. This was the grave. Armed with this validated lead, Sarah intensified her research, now with a specific target. The French Society had cross-referenced their records with Luftwaffe archives, a painstaking process that eventually yielded a name: Lieutenant Klaus Richter, a young pilot from a small town in Bavaria. He was just 22, a new father, and had been on his first combat tour when his Messerschmitt was shot down. The revelation hit Sarah with profound force. Her grandfather's nameless young man now had a face, a history, a family. This wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a deeply personal tragedy, touched by an extraordinary act of grace. The next phase of her quest was even more daunting: finding Klaus Richter's descendants. Germany's post-war history, with its shifting borders and displaced populations, presented a labyrinth of challenges. Sarah dove into German genealogical databases, scoured online forums for German military history, and even reached out to local Bavarian historical societies. Months turned into a year, filled with dead ends and moments of despair. She felt the weight of her grandfather's unspoken promise, a silent imperative to complete the story. Then, through a distant cousin of Richter, located via an obscure family tree website, she found them. Klaus Richter's daughter, Helga, now a woman in her late 70s, and his grandson, Stefan, a professor of history at a university in Munich. Composing the initial email to Helga was perhaps the most difficult part of the entire journey. How do you tell a woman that your grandfather, an American fighter pilot, shot down her father but then buried him with respect? Sarah chose honesty, humility, and a deep sense of shared humanity. She included excerpts from her grandfather's journal, the photograph of the makeshift grave, and a heartfelt explanation of her mission. The response was slow in coming, a week of agonizing silence. Then an email arrived. It was from Stefan. He explained that his mother, Helga, had often spoken of the profound, unresolved grief over her father's disappearance, a wound that had never truly healed. The official German records had simply listed him as missing in action, presumed dead with no known grave. Sarah's email, Stefan wrote, was like a bolt of lightning from the past, simultaneously devastating and incredibly comforting. For Helga, it was the first tangible piece of closure she had ever received. The family had always yearned for knowledge, for a final resting place, and now, miraculously, they had it. The emotional reunion was not a grand public spectacle, but a quiet, deeply personal meeting in a neutral location, a small cafe in Strasbourg, France, a city that had itself known the scars of war. Sarah, representing her grandfather's legacy, met Helga and Stefan. The initial moments were filled with a palpable tension, a mix of apprehension and profound anticipation. Helga, a woman whose eyes held the echoes of decades of unanswered questions, looked at Sarah with an intensity that spoke volumes. Sarah, in turn, saw in Helga the daughter of the young pilot her grandfather had honored. There were no accusations, no bitterness, only a shared, profound understanding that transcended language and nationality. As they sat and talked, sharing stories and photographs, the chasm of war began to recede. Sarah explained her grandfather's character, his quiet dignity, and the moral compass that had guided his actions that day. Stefan, in turn, spoke of Klaus Richter, not as an enemy pilot, but as a loving father, a talented musician, a young man with a life full of promise tragically cut short. Helga, tears streaming down her face, expressed a gratitude that no words could fully capture. For her, the anonymous grave had become a sacred place, and the American pilot, once an enemy, was now a source of comfort, a silent guardian of her father's memory. It was an act of reconciliation, not between nations, but between families, between the past and the present. The shared humanity that had compelled Captain Miller to dig that grave decades ago now blossomed into a tangible connection, bridging divides that war had intended to make permanent. It was a powerful testament to how a single act of compassion could ripple through time, offering not just closure, but a profound sense of healing and understanding across former enemy lines. This meeting, this exchange of stories and tears, underscored the universal desire for dignity, for remembrance, and for the recognition that even in the darkest moments of conflict, the light of human kindness can endure and ultimately connect us all. This profound encounter serves as a powerful reminder that while the machinery of war seeks to divide and dehumanize, the individual human spirit retains an incredible capacity for empathy and moral courage. Captain Miller's solitary act, performed on a quiet French field, was not a grand strategic maneuver, but a deeply personal choice to honor a fallen foe, to see beyond the uniform and recognize a shared humanity. It highlights the power of one person's decision to defy the prevailing animosity, demonstrating that dignity and respect are not privileges reserved for allies, but fundamental rights for all, even in death. This isn't merely a historical anecdote of World War II. It's a timeless testament to the enduring truth that compassion can bloom in the most barren of landscapes, bridging chasms that seem insurmountable. In a world still grappling with conflicts and divisions, this story offers a beacon of hope. It challenges us to look beyond the labels, the ideologies, and the superficial differences that often separate us. It asks us to consider, what choices are we making today? How do we treat those we perceive as other? Can we find the courage to extend understanding and kindness even when it feels difficult or goes against the grain? The lessons from Captain Miller's act resonate far beyond the battlefield, urging us to seek common ground, to foster reconciliation, and to remember that every individual holds the power to make a profound difference, to sow seeds of humanity that can grow into powerful legacies for future generations. This remarkable journey from a forgotten grave to a healing reunion proves that the human heart, when guided by empathy, can overcome even the deepest scars of war. What are your thoughts on this incredible story of compassion and connection? Share your reflections in the comments below. If this narrative moved you, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel for more stories of human resilience and historical significance, and join us as we continue to explore the enduring impact of small acts of kindness that echo through time. Let Captain Miller's legacy be a reminder that hope and reconciliation are always possible, and that the triumph of compassion over hatred is a choice we can all make every single day.